Isle of Wight Council's Audit and Governance Committee meeting of Monday, 25th of September. So the first thing to let you know, there are no planned fire drills this morning, or if there have been, they have taken place. So if you do hear the fire alarm, please treat it as a real emergency and evacuate the building via the nearest safe escape route behind most people there. Down the stairs to your left as you go out, as you leave the council chamber, or the public gallery for the member of the public who is there. Exit via the door at the back of the building and walk across the inner car park to the evacuation point, which is the pavement opposite the police station. The lifts can't be used in the event of an emergency. Please do not enter the building, re-enter the building, that is, until you're advised it's safe to do so by a member of staff. So there is that. Hopefully we will not be disturbed in that way. Also, just to remind everyone present that this meeting is recorded and is publicised. Both Councillors Churchman and I are suffering from a diminution of our hearing today. So please use your microphones and perhaps do as I have done and bring them quite close to you for those of you who are softer spoken. Otherwise, you'll just find me nodding and smiling at you in an agreeable way, but not actually quite hearing what you're saying. Can I welcome representatives of Ernst & Young to our meeting, and in particular to welcome Helen Thompson on the basis that this is your last one with us. And I just wanted to say on behalf of the committee and all the members of staff that we thank you for your service, as they say. I know you're going on to exciting things, I'm sure, but wish you well in that. I'm sure that we benefited enormously from the work that you have done formally for us. And I must say personally, as chair of the committee, that I've benefited greatly from the advice, guidance that you've given me in our candid sessions outside those meetings. But I don't know if you wanted to say a couple of words, but I'll let you do so if you wish.
Thank you, Chairman. And let me just move this a bit closer. I turned it off first. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this is my final meeting with Isle of Wight, and I'll be leaving EY in a few weeks' time, taking up a new post, still in public audit, but in slightly different area from where I am now. I've very much enjoyed working with the council. It's been, I think, 7 years that I've been your engagement lead, and there's been a lot of change over time. I wish you all the very best for the future. I know I'm leaving you in safe hands, as I'll be handing my responsibilities over to Kevin Souter, who worked on the island before as a senior manager. So some of you will know him from there. But I think so hopefully some continuity with Jason continuing is our plan. So there's a lot of change in the public sector audit world, and we don't have all the answers today. But hopefully over the next few weeks, there will be some announcements being made, which will hopefully make it clearer about how we return to a sustainable audit delivery pattern. And I'm sure we might cover that later. But thank you, Chairman, for your kind words. They're much appreciated.
You're very welcome. So on formally to our agenda. So item 1 is apologies and changes in membership. I have been advised of an apology from Councillor Lucioni, and also an apology and then the change in a substitution from Councillor Ray Redrup. He is being substituted by Councillor Quirk, who has experience on this committee before, of course, do you not? I have not heard anything of Councillor Critchison, but I believe she intended to come, but as we know, she's nursing her injury still, so it may be that which is holding her up. The minutes of the last meeting. Oh, I should say, if you are referring to anything today, can you be really clear if you're referring to the page number, which is the page number in the full pack, or the page number of a report, so that we're not sort of thinking about them. And those of us who are working totally electronically, just scrolling upwards and downwards in a kind of aimless and bewildered way. So anyway, I'll move from the chair that the minutes of the meeting held on the 31st of July 2023 be confirmed as a true record, unless there are amendments to that. Is that agreeable with you, members? I see no dissent and I saw at least one nod, so I will take it that that is the case. So I'll just initial and sign. Okay. Next item 3, is for any councillors here to declare any interest they might have in the matters on the agenda. Any Councillor Jarman.
Declare an interest under 5C as chairman of the pension fund.
That any other declarations? Councillor Churchman.
I'm the vice chair of the pensions fund, so I declare an interest.
Yes. But you'll still remain entitled to comment on those papers. So, and if there are no other declarations, I'll move us on to item 4, which is public question time. No written questions have been received, but I do have notice from Simon Richards of an oral question. Mr. Richards, if you'd like to switch on the microphone up there and ask your question.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to preempt my question with a little bit of context, if I may. At the Cabinet meeting on 14th of September, Councillor PC Wilcox stated that the Council cannot proceed with the school place planning process at the same time as managing the transition away from the partnership with Hampshire County Council, indicating a delay of at least 4 months. And then at full council last week, Councillor Andre stated that it is now impossible to address the school place overcapacity before September 2024. So here's the question. Does this committee agree that this inaction will place additional pressure on school budgets and increase the risk of schools falling into deficit, exacerbating the risk identified at your last meeting?
Well, first of all, thank you for your question. Second, I think it would be very difficult for this committee to reach a conclusion one way and another. I'm not convinced that it would be within the terms of reference as such of this committee. But within cabinet, but our role would be certainly be looking at the delivery against policy. But I'm not sure. But I'll look to my left to colleagues here, or indeed that we have a cabinet member present in Councillor Bacon who might want to offer some comment.
I'll just make 2 very brief comments, Chair. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Firstly, the fact that we cannot proceed with a process of school closures, school place planning at the same time as the transition to away from Hampshire is clear advice from Hampshire and from the current director, which we need to follow. Secondly, Councillor Andre's comment, obviously that related specifically to a process of school closures. Part of the process we're going through is to see if there are other ways of addressing the school place issue, which may, of course, because they are different, could be different and could have a different statutory consultation timetable, etc., could be achievable within a shorter time frame. So that was actually a very specific reference rather than to the entire issue.
Thank you, that's helpful. But I'll take comments from my colleagues as well through me as though an answer to this question. So Councillor Churchman first, as an answer.
Do we know who the cabinet member for Children's Services is? Because it was Councillor Andre. Then, as far as I remember, Councillor PC Wilcox took over. So that's just the first of the issues. Thank you, Chair.
Has there been any announcement over the weekend that I've missed? So it currently rests with Councillor PC Wilcox, unless she's...
Councillor Andre is the member for Children's Services, but Councillor PC Wilcox took on a specific responsibility for education, obviously with the events of last week. There may be a change, but that's in the hands of Councillor Jordan. I can't speak for him. I don't know.
Councillor Jarman.
Just to follow up, first of all, to follow on from Councillor Churchman's question, I think it would be remiss of the council if we were not to clarify that situation with as the earliest opportunity. But clearly there is an impact on the children of the island of delay. It has been a protracted delay over a very long period of time, and we'll await the outcome of that decision. Perhaps we could ask for a written update to this committee on a couple of issues, one of which would be that I raised 4 weeks ago or more and sent in a reminder about 10 days ago for a breakdown per school of the island of their debt, which would become a fiscal burden on the council were they to be closed. And I've not received an answer for that yet, despite the reminder going in. I've got a few nods opposite, so they know it's outstanding. And I really think we should have that information as the earliest opportunity. I'm not saying that a financial decision alone should be the determining factor on this. Clearly, there are other issues about performance. We're all mindful of the advice which came in with the headmaster's letter at the beginning of the year, and of the forward-looking plan in terms of the count and the allocation of places within each of the schools. It's a complex decision to make. What I'm saying is that we need to hurry up and make that decision, and the longer we delay it, the greater that financial burden I suspect will be that will transfer to the council.
Absolutely. Councillor Quirk?
The issue is the rationalisation of school places. That the consequence is closure of schools. But I would encourage early attention to this because it matters. And as has been said, there are, I believe, over £6 million worth of over budget schools. And they're not allowed to be, and that all falls on us. So that's important to bear in mind. And the process, the consultation for closing schools is not necessarily the same as the process of looking at school places. And we should be looking at school places now, and we should be taking and giving serious consideration to what the head teachers of the schools are saying, because they seem to be at loggerheads with what has come out of the administration in the past 2 months.
Thank you for that. On this, that expanded upon your question, Mr. Richards, of course, on the very specific, I don't think we could make a commitment one way or another in terms of whether we agreed with you or not. But do you have a supplementary?
I'm just it's refreshing to hear this committee debating the issue and recognising the risks, not just to the council in terms of the risk of those schools falling into deficit and what the future of those schools might be, and then what happens to their deficit. I think it's right for members to recognise that will fall to the council, and that delaying at this point just increases the risk of that situation happening, but also recognising the risk to the quality of education for our young people. And I'd just like to come back to Councillor Bacon about the exploration of alternative
You can show through a supplementary question as such. Yeah.
Yes, I suppose the question is to Councillor Bacon specifically, given that council officers have already presented a paper to Cabinet outlining how the overcapacity of primary school places can be addressed through school closures and that no other solutions are practical, why is the Cabinet still looking for Magic Door 3?
I'll take that. Strictly speaking, it would be more a question directly into Cabinet, but as we have a cabinet member here,
yes,
you're able to respond.
It's probably more a matter for children's scrutiny as well, really, but we do seem to be discussing it. I think it's fair to say the Cabinet are not satisfied that all avenues were satisfactorily explored, and believe there's further a process of engagement and understanding that should be gone through that was not. And I think Councillor P.C. Wilcox made that clear in the many statements she made on this issue. Therefore, we also have the fact now that the Hampshire have decided to depart. So that gives us the opportunity to repair what we see as those problems. As I've been asked to comment, I would agree with Councillor Quirk's comments. Absolutely right. This needs to be addressed. It is being addressed. I think that was made clear by the new leader last week. I think one thing for direct interest of this committee in terms of questions of risk is, of course, like I probably should declare an interest here because I am a governor of a school that has been through a deficit situation but recovered from it. It is, of course, the case that debt only falls to the council if and when a school closes, not before. And certainly there are situations where debt and deficit can be managed and resolved. As I say, I'll declare an interest in that regard. So, sorry, Chairman, a few comments there, but we are underway with this process and we are doing it for very specific reasons, which have been outlined and stated several times by the previous leader.
Thank you for that, Councillor Bacon. Thank you, Mr. Richards, again for your question. I think you may want to be heading off to corporate scrutiny and cabinet and other scrutiny committee, the Children's Services Scrutiny Committee at some point to further raise that matter. But hopefully you've heard something that's gives you some comfort that the issue is being properly considered within the council. And I've made a particular point about the effect that there is risk. It's strictly speaking a public question time, Councillor John, but I'll take you briefly.
I was just following up on the answer that Councillor Bacon gave. If he could elucidate, what were the options that Cabinet felt staff had not properly addressed? Quote him.
I think we're straying outside of the terms of reference of
Really
this
are.
committee, to be honest. But if you can take that up either outside of the meeting or at cabinet, could, Councillor Jarman. I'll move us on to the next item. I don't think there is another member of the public present for a question, so no. So we have the reports of the external auditor, Ernst & Young, 3 reports. I'm sure, colleagues, you have read as closely as you can those reports, but I will invite Ernst & Young representatives to highlight to us the key points and within those.
Thank you, Chairman. If you don't mind, we would quite like to cover items B and C before we cover item A, i.e. do the verbal update on the audit results report for 21-22, and then we'll cover off the Auditors Annual reports separately. Is that okay?
That makes sense.
So, thank you. So I'm going to just hand over to Jason to briefly summarise the completion, hopefully in the next 2 days, of the 21-22 audits for the Council and the Pension Fund.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen, and good morning all. Chair, at the last meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee, we communicated an anticipated sign-off date of August 23, subject to a few levels of review. Coming out of that review, we identified some additional evidence we required for the membership data testing in relation to the pension fund. So we've obtained those evidence and we're happy that we now have the assurances, and the only remaining steps now are to receive the signed statement of accounts and the signed letter of representation, which we're hoping to obtain at the end of this meeting. And that will allow us to then just do our final checks, and we'll be ready to sign in the next couple of days, which would then close off the 21-22 audits for both the pension fund and the council. Happy to take any questions on that before handing back to Helen.
Colleagues, any questions on that? That obviously quite short verbal update. Otherwise, don't see any. So back to Helen Thompson.
Thank you. So the report that is on the agenda, and we will assume that you have read it and that we don't need to go through it in detail, is the Auditor's Annual report. So this report summarises the work that we have done on the Council's financial statements and value for money work for 21-22. So we have marked it as draft, and you will see that there are certain dates that need to be completed within that, and that obviously links to signing off the auditor's report, which we anticipate will be tomorrow. What this does is it provides a summary of what we have already reported through the audit results report. Sorry, I'm getting some feedback and I don't know how annoying that is. Is it too close to the computer? move the computer back then. I'll try that. Is that better?
So slide.
Do you think that's going to work better? Oh, that's better. Right, we'll try that. So what this does is it summarises the detail that's in the audit results report on the risks that we identified as part of the financial statements audit. So although our previous verbal update was quite brief, you do have a summary of the work that we have completed. We also include our value for money commentary. So this is the second year that we have done so under the new code of practice. We have separated it for those members who can remember the previous report. There is now a summary in the front end of the report, and the detailed arrangements are included in an appendix. It would be fair to say that the detail in the appendix has been updated to bring it, broadly speaking, up to date, but we haven't done a huge amount of work unless arrangements have changed. And so the key element that Jason will introduce in a moment and summarise is in the front section of the report. We also include our expected fee variation request within the report, which is something that officers have had the opportunity to look at, but will be determined by public sector audit appointments, regardless of whatever agreement we might reach locally. So it brings the whole of the audit together effectively is the purpose of this. So I'll hand over to Jason to let him have fun with his microphone and he'll introduce a little bit more detail.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen. Chair, if we can start on page 13 of the pack, which just summarizes the main highlights, which is a proposed unqualified opinion on the financial statements and no matters to report by exception. We also are satisfied that the annual governance statement and the narrative statements were consistent with the statement of accounts, and that goes for the pension fund as well. In terms of the key findings, that starts on page 15 of the pack. I won't go through all of them in detail, because we would have communicated the detailed findings at the March committee. But since then, when the triennial valuation became available, we were required to do additional work, and we report on the testing on pages 7 and 8 of our report, which is 17 and 18 of the pack. But just in terms of background in relation to that year for members, when the triennial valuation became available, the council's net pension liability reduced by 2.9 million. And that adjustment was processed in the council statement of accounts. We also needed to reconsider the gross liability element of the net pension liability. And we used our pension specialist to have a look at that. And in terms of their analysis, they use a 2% threshold. And the gross liability was further overstated by about 2.1 million. And that is the difference above the 2% threshold that I just mentioned. And we agreed with management that we'd keep that as just a judgmental difference. So the details of the membership data testing is contained on page 17 and 18 of the pack. And there's just one correction we needed to make on page 18, Chair. That's the recommendation. We refer to the membership data held on the pension administration system. That should read the employer's system, because the delays we experienced was more the evidence from the employer side, from the council, rather than the pension fund. So we'll make that correction in the final version. Before I go on to value for money, is there any questions at this point, Chair?
Any questions, colleagues? Councillor Jarman.
I just ask, where on the employer side of is that data held? Which part of the data structure?
Yeah, so some of it is on the council system, but some of it is also at the external service provider, so strictly education in this instance. And we did struggle to obtain some of the evidence, things like birth certificates, final salaries, because the members are across all the various schools, and strictly education is the service provider in that respect. So getting things from strictly education proved quite difficult.
So would it be correct to say that it's not actually the council side of the system which is the issue? It's the third party affiliate bodies which is the issue. Just to be very precise about your clarification that you're going to put into the report.
Chair, it's was both actually, so a combination.
So Quirk, I think you indicated.
Nice to be back on the committee, even if temporary. Very encouraging that we've got an unqualified report in terms of the statements, etc. And going through it, I mean, a very encouraging report all the way through. There is on page 17 of our numbering of the documents, page 7 of their numbering of the document, the recommendation for the more granular accounting records. Just asking our own internal people, will we be picking this up and how?
I can comment on that one. Yeah, we've had some internal discussion already about the development of infrastructure assets. It's mainly around areas such as roads, how they're classified on the system. So at the minute, a lot of areas are grouped together. So in the future, we'll be investigating, breaking that down into further detail.
So we're on top of it. That's the important bit.
Yeah,
You're
just
happy
to
with
comment in voids that it requires a meeting with highways, so because they hold a lot of the detail rather than just finance.
Ellen Thompson, you wish to comment?
Yes, so not in any way to contradict what's being said, but I think just to give a little bit more detail, when we developed the recommendation, this is on the expectation that the temporary relief to the SIPFA Code of Audit Practice to allow us to conclude on infrastructure assets was obviously put in place until 31st of March 2025. And as part of that, our recommendation is that, in the expectation that that temporary relief will be removed, the council needs to think about what it needs to do in response. However, because there is a wider discussion, let's say, in terms of how public sector audit in England in particular and how we get ourselves back on track, both as councils and audit firms, to deliver to a sustainable timetable and a more timely timetable going forward. I think there's still ongoing discussions between SIPFA, Financial Reporting Council, DLUC, very many parties. So whilst I suppose what I'm trying to say is that for committee members, don't necessarily expect officers to deal with this recommendation quickly, because I would actually caution waiting and doing it in line with the wider knowledge of what are going to be the requirements for both the preparation of accounts and the audit of accounts going forward. And there's quite a lot of work and we don't quite know what that picture looks like yet. So it is important that this remains on the radar, but it's not important that it's dealt with it within, for example, the next 6 months. Hope that is helpful.
That sounds helpful. Councillor Jarman?
So just a question, where we have an asset which is valued at an open market rate, which is owned by the council, and we dispose of that asset, sometimes I believe below market rates, the figure that it's disposed of is often kept confidential under some commercial agreement. How would we account for that within our central accounts and for the differential between the market rates and the disposal? How would you expect for that to be dealt with in the accounts?
Well, we would expect for it to be accounted in line with proper accounting practice in terms of what is reported. So that would be included within a range of different adjustments that go through and account, as you account for assets at the end of the year. In terms of what is actually disclosed in terms of particular figures for particular assets, that's a decision for the council, rather than something that I would want to comment on.
Okay, so I think we can now move on to the next section of things, if you wish, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, we could turn to page 21 of the pack, which is our value for money commentary. I don't propose to go through in detail, but the NAO Code of Practice requires us to provide commentary against the 3 reporting criteria. And that is financial sustainability, governance, and economy efficiency and effectiveness. So our commentary is contained in pages 12 to 14. So just a correction on that page, Chair, where it references pages 10 to 12, that should be page 12 to 14. So that contains our commentary against the 3 reporting criteria. And just to further comment on that section, during our planning risk assessment, we did not identify any risk of significant weakness in the council's arrangements against those 3 reporting criteria. And after conclusion of our work, we've not identified any significant weaknesses in the council's arrangements. If you could turn to Appendix A on page 26, that's just again a summary of the council's arrangements, which we mentioned earlier against the 3 reporting criteria, and that's further broken down into sub criteria. So these arrangements, Chair, these are the council's arrangements, which we have captured based on our discussions and review of key supporting documents. And it reflects how the council, including management and this committee, are you on a daily, monthly, or quarterly basis address those 3 key areas. So those arrangements should be familiar to members and to officers. And yeah, as I've said, that's the council's arrangements, and yeah, happy to take any questions.
Well, certainly they were familiar, but it in some ways it's actually quite useful to see something like that restated back to us, so that we do understand what we have said in governance statements and whatever, kind of like, yeah, that has been captured. And obviously your commentary around no significant weaknesses, etc., is very, very encouraging. But colleagues, do you have any questions on that section of the report? I think they are very, very detailed, these reports, and so the lack of questions doesn't mean that there's lack of interest, as I always say. So, okay, so is there anything further we need to hear from you?
The only thing I would say is when we have issued the audit reports for the council and the pension fund, we will obviously update the Auditors Annual report, and then we will reissue that with the corrections that we've identified, noting another one in Appendix B, which is a summary of recommendations. It includes the infrastructure asset. It doesn't yet include the pension fund one in this version. And then we would expect that to be published on the council's website in due course. We cannot close the audit for 21-22, so we cannot issue the audit certificate to certify it closed. That's no fault of the council at all. It is linked to the fact that we work to the National Audit Office in relation to the whole of government accounts and work that they do at that level. Until they confirm that they do not require us to undertake any further procedures, we have to leave the audit open. So the audit certificate will be issued in due course, hopefully slightly quicker than in 2021 when we issued the certificate about a month ago. So but that's all I wanted to say. And again, thank you for your support in my time as your auditor for the council. And I wish you well for the future, as I said earlier.
Well, indeed, thank you. And Councillor Quirk has already commented on one of those recommendations, but I'm sure this committee, if you did want to dip in and watch us online at any point, hopefully you will see us, I'm sure you will, we'll see us acting upon those recommendations amongst other matters. But colleagues, any further comments on these reports? I don't think is there a formal recommendation we need to take at this stage? There is not. Otherwise, we have received your reports with thanks. And in which case, we can move on to item 6, which is the internal audit progress report from page 45 onwards in the pack. Again, members will have read those reports, but I will invite the Chief Internal Auditor to highlight anything in particular to us.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, there is very little, to be honest, to highlight to you. There are a number of audits that we have completed since the last reporting period. There isn't anything of significant concern that are coming out of them. There has been some movement in relation to the plan, which is detailed towards the latter end. And obviously we need to tell you as to whether we're on time for completing the reviews between now and the end of the year, which we should be. Beyond that, I don't wish to bring your attention to anything in specific.
Councillor Churchman.
Yes, I'm personally still concerned very much about the floating bridge. And on page 46, supports the corporate plan core value of being fair and transparent. As an auditor, how come that there can be non-disclosure agreements about taxpayers' money, whether it's gone in or come out? And if money has come in from some contractual deal with Floating Bridge, where will it show in the audit? Thank you.
Councillor, I'm not certain that is a question for myself to answer, being your internal auditors. So obviously, if there is transactions within the council, that is going to reflect within the accounts. So it's not really for myself to answer that particular question.
As the question has been put, though, is there an officer here who feels that they can give some response to Councillor Churchman?
In terms of the accounts, the relevant transactions are shown according to the regulations, so they are correctly accounted for, but they are subject to non-disclosure. So the individual transactions are accounted for within a class of transactions. So the individual amount will not be visible within that class. And if we were asked with more specific questions around what that amount is, then it is subject to the non-disclosure rules, as we've been advised by legal.
When I explored this before, there is statutory basis for that, isn't there? It's not just us making up that we anything or just on the non-disclosure side of things. There is a statutory basis for that action that is being taken to support that non-disclosure.
Absolutely.
But absolutely, I understand, and I understand the frustrations of anybody who would deeply love to know what that figure is. But we bump up against statute, and that is our problem on that. So I presume some forensic accountant could work through and perhaps discern a figure, but that way beyond any understanding that I may have on the number. But it is an important question. Any other questions on the Chief Internal Auditors? Councillor Quirk.
On page 9 of the document, page 57 of our numbering, there's the bereavement services, high risk in debt recovery, and then it says closed verified. Are we expecting this to go down to a much lower risk level in the future?
Councillor, the follow-up work, the way it is shown within this report is to just remind you which areas there were gaps flagged and the risk rating, i.e. whether it was high, medium or low, and obviously to give you a position update. So we keep the information as is. If an action has closed verified, it means that high risk, when we've gone back to retest, has sufficient controls and arrangements in place. So we don't alter the narrative because it was originally a high risk. We just explain whether it is closed or not.
Thank you. Any other questions on this report? Otherwise, we will note the report in the usual way. I see no further questions, so thank you very much for that. The report is, of course, noted by the committee, And just to reassure the press, just because we may note something doesn't, as you will have heard, it doesn't mean we are not interested in what in its contents and paying a keen interest in that. So, in which case I can move us on to item 7, the annual governance statement. That's pages 65 onwards in the pack. The officer is on line for us, on the screen for us, is Debbie Downer. As usual, just are there any particular points that you would want to highlight to us?
No, I don't think so. Thank you, Chair. This by definition is the annual report that the committee has seen regularly. It provides councillors with details of the statutory requirements under the Accounts and Audit Regulations 2015. The draft statement has already been shared with the committee outside of the meetings process. I would perhaps ask that you do note in Appendix 1, which is from page 84, the progress against actions for 21-22 and also the future actions that we'll be monitoring through 23-24. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that. Obviously, I know I fed through a number of observations some time ago on this, but colleagues have had an opportunity to comment. So any further comment on that, or I can move to the recommendation? No,
That's fine.
It's fine. Councillor Churchman, you're, oh, okay, in which case I will, because there is a formal recommendation here, so that this committee agree that subject to the final accounts being signed off, the content of the draft annual governance statement 2022-23 is confirmed as the final version for publication. I'll move that from the chair. Is that agreed? Yep, nods and hands. So that is indeed agreed. And thank you, Debbie Downer, for your work on this.
Thank you, Chair.
So that brings us to item 8, which is the Treasury Management Report for Q1, page 91 in the pack onwards. Again, any things to highlight to us, Scott?
Thank you, Chair. Not really. This is the usual quarterly report. The only thing I will sort of mention is, as you're probably aware, we've been lots of changes in interest rates recently, and since the last since the report was raised, the interest rates have again been increased. They went up to 5.25% in August, but last week the MPC decided not to increase them again, as you're probably all aware. I haven't yet received an updated forecast from Ireland Coast, so I don't know where they are visioning the rates to go. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that I know we're all aware there's lots of local authorities having issues with Section 114 notices and sort of saying they're struggling to balance budgets. At the end of June, we did not have any investments with any local authorities. Since then, we have lent one local authority some money for a 3-month period. The local authority is not one of the ones that is saying they are having issues, and certainly we keep in close contact with Ireland Close, our investment advisors, to make sure that we know who we should not be lending money to. Apart from that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Colleagues, questions? It does seem our treasury management function continues to perform very effectively. So, and you can see nods there from the table. But Councillor Jarman.
Yeah, well, first of all, to thank Jo very much for all of her hard work she does with the team. I'm aware there's been a number of changes, personnel and resources, and I wondered if that was having any impact, and indeed how people were coming along who've recently transitioned to that.
To be honest, the Treasury management team is fairly stable. There's myself, and there is I have a colleague who does all day-to-day work for me, who's been in place for the last 18 months, I think it is. So we seem to have a little system going quite well. So no, for me, there's not been any major changes that has affected us. Thank you for your concern, however.
Any other questions on this? Which case we will note your report and look forward to your next report for quarter two. Which then brings us to item 9, the council's risk profile, which is from pages 111 onwards. I've already had a discussion with Debbie Downer about this and had an exchange with the chief executive as well. That, as you will see, italicized text shows the change from the previous time, if I've understood that correctly. It is good to see commentary changing on that. I've discussed with the officer about how other text should fall out of place so it doesn't become an ever expanding document. It remains a very usable document. I'm still looking forward to joining CMT at some point to observe their discussions around risk, but the chief executive knows of my keen interest in that. And there are 2 new strategic risks added at, if I remember correctly, 18 and 19. And I would like to invite would it be yourself, the chief executive, to comment on the addition of both of those risks?
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to comment, and obviously if Debbie Downer has any additional comments as well, I'm sure you're happy to hear from her. There were 2 new risks that were considered by CMT. One was in relation to the termination of the Children's Services Partnership, and we felt it was appropriate at this point in time to add that as a corporate risk, because it does mean a significant amount of work between now and putting in place new arrangements. And it is important that we manage that in the right way and understand that that is a risk for delivery of services directly. And of course, we have very clear statutory responsibilities that we need to ensure we are covering in that respect. The second one, and I believe that this is the one that you were referring to in particular when we said that we'd had a conversation, and I do agree, Chair, that there is a wording amendment that we need to consider in terms of this risk. And it is worded as no overall control of political control within the council. And of course, you are absolutely right in that there are a number of councils across the country where there is no overall political control. And it is not that issue that we are considering with this risk. And indeed, given the events at the last full council, things have moved on since this risk was considered, which was in August. So with your permission and with the consideration of the committee, I would like to suggest that the nuance around this risk is perhaps more appropriately considered in terms of the overall risk around delivering the council's vision, as opposed to being a separate politically sounded risk at this point in time, and happy to review that at CMT the next time this risk comes forward for review, which will be shortly.
I'm very grateful for that. Also, can I just clarify which of the 2 new risks, because there was a duplication in our paperwork as to, as you might see on pages 138, 137 and 138, I think it is, it appears to get duplicated, but with a slightly different score. Which of those should
I'll hand over to Debbie to explain that.
So, Ms. Downer, if you can clarify.
Thank you very much.
For us.
Yes, I apologise. That's completely my error. I copied the text from a previous risk and it remained in as the green. The actual target score is medium 8 in terms of the impact or potential impact of this particular risk as it's worded. So for the notes, it would be that the target score is 8 medium, and the current score as at August, as the chief exec explained, was high 12.
Yeah, no, that's helpful to have that clarification, and I'm grateful to the chief executive for engaging with me on this. I think it is very, very important that obviously officers would not be wishing to be seen to making a judgment about the political nature of the council, but just certain aspects of the situation that we are in. The one around the children's services, the new risk 18, makes a huge amount of sense to separate that out from the general. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion in the general strategic risk around children's services. But that certainly does make a lot of sense to draw that out. And in terms of your decision around strategic risk 19, I hope that will be wrapped back in, as you just indicated, into the corporate vision risk at some point, as hopefully last week's full council has provided some comfort on that one. If you wish to come back on that, and then colleagues' questions.
Thank you. I'm more than happy to wrap that risk into the delivering the council's vision overall risk. And I think it's probably also worth indicating that the strategic risk in relation to the Children's Services Partnership is obviously a risk that will be in place for a period of time and not necessarily a risk that will continue infinitely as we move forward, because at some point we will have mitigated and addressed that risk in terms of having alternative arrangements in place.
Colleagues, we did actually raise some questions on this and last time. Hopefully you've seen those coming through. One of the ones that I raised was what exactly reinterpretation meant in terms of the PFI contract. I think that's something I might take up through our scrutiny colleagues to see what that actually might mean. It's obviously in the nature of such big contracts, there are always delicate conversations going on all the time, but it struck me that a word like that could have many meanings if it's not well explained. But colleagues, questions on this paper? Councillor Quirk.
In the early part, it shows a risk for adult social care and it shows as a risk for children's services, but in the early part of the year, both children's services and adult social care are running ahead of budget. Now, that can be sorted in the longer term, can it? Because whilst you can use the reserves this year to cover it, they'll be gone by next year. So just some responses to are we getting those overspends under control?
I can give you some general commentary and then I'll hand over to Kerry Hubbleday for some more detailed information, Chair. Managing budgets within year, Councillor Quirk, is not an unusual situation for local authorities to be in, and you'll understand that every local authority, the overspends and underspends in various departments fluctuate throughout the year. The point of our corporate management team budget management meetings that we have monthly is to discuss exactly that, the situation with overspends and the mitigation that we intend to put in place across directorates to manage that overspend as much as possible. If I talk about that in terms of in-year management, and then I'll bring Kerry in to talk about the kind of longer term approach and wider budget management issues in relation to that.
Thank you. Yeah, in terms of how that feeds into our budget setting process for over the medium term, as you're probably aware, we review the whole budget situation on an annual basis with a view of setting the budget for the immediate forthcoming year and with a view to knowing what that position looks like for the subsequent 2 years as well. That process takes place at this time of year and will run right up until the February position when the budget is set, February 24. We're not yet aware of our funding from central government. There are lots of pieces to this exercise whereby we don't know all of the information until much later on in the process. But the budget is formally reviewed each year. Any particular pressures, particularly as you mentioned, social care, which we believe will be ongoing. First of all, there is that exercise of trying to mitigate them by taking action that can have that impact to reduce that pressure as much as possible. Any pressures which we believe are ongoing get wrapped up in the overall process, whereby we then come to a conclusion about setting the legal budget. And again, once we know what our funding looks like and we've assessed our levels of contingency. A lot of the items going forward can be determined as risks rather than the fact that they are actually here with us now. So some of there are there are always changes in the demand-led services such as adults and children's social care. Positions can change, and the council does, in that process that we go through, consider how much risk we're prepared to take and how we could meet those risks if and when any of them come to fruition. So there's a lot of consideration, is basically what I'm saying, in terms of trying to determine whether pressures are real, that need absolutely built into the budget, whether we can accept a degree of risk on some of them. And it's a very comprehensive, very detailed process that we are embarking on at the moment, and will conclude in February 24.
Thank you. Councillor Churchman and then Councillor Jarman.
I wonder whether we should be adding another risk to the register. And when I say risk, I'm thinking of staffing. At the moment, we don't have a Director of Education, which is a statutory part of any council. Well, we won't have, but what I'm getting at is that if we eventually set up our own Children's Services Directorate, we will have to employ staff, and getting staff, good staff to come to the island is not easy. I know that the pensions officer has mentioned that we recruited staff to help with pensions, and that in fact we don't pay anywhere near mainland prices. And I think one or two came. Joe, perhaps you could confirm that. And then I think left for better jobs on the mainland. So this is a serious problem for the council if we don't have enough staff to actually run the joint. Perhaps, Wendy, you would like to comment on that, but it really does worry me. We've also lost 3 of the regeneration team. That 1 or 2 have retired, one's had contract not renewed, and as I said, we can't run a council properly if we don't have the staff to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me, a bit croaky this morning. I do apologise. I'll take those 2 issues separately, if I may. First, I'll address the children's services issue, and then we'll talk a little bit about the regeneration side as well. So in terms of the children's services issue, we do currently have a Director of Children's Services. It is a statutory post. We have to have a Director of Children's Services. As part of the arrangement for the termination of the current partnership, which Cabinet discussed at their last meeting on the 14th, we had previously as well taken a report to the Employment and Appointments Committee, allowing for the recruitment to a post of a DCS to start as soon as possible, should Cabinet agree that we wanted to move with the option of putting in place a leadership team. So there are a number of posts that are currently provided across children's services, whether that's adult social care or children's social care or education, where the current incumbents are employed by Hampshire County Council. There are equally a greater number of posts where the current incumbents are employed by the Isle of Wight Council. And what we are looking to do is put in place a leadership team that enables us to continue a safe and robust Children's Services Directorate. Thank you very much. And to ensure that we have enough time to recruit a Director of Children's Services. I can report to this committee that the recruitment campaign for the Director of Children's Services is now live. That started last week and has been advertised in a number of professional journals as well as national press. The closing date for that is the 18th of October. That does, sorry, that does allow us, with allowing time for notice to be given for a person to be employed by the 1st of February, which is the new date for the start of our new arrangements. And we also have permission from the Appointments and Employments Committee to put in place interim arrangements should we wish to do so and need to do so, to ensure that we do have that statutory post in place. Obviously, there are risks associated with any recruitment campaign, but we will do as we do with any other posts, and we will manage those risks, understanding where we are in the recruitment situation. With regard to the regeneration staff, members will remember that in the budget last year, full council agreed to a budget line which saw the reduction of staffing capacity to the equivalent financial value of 1.2 million. And it was appropriate for those staff to be taken out of services that were not statutory services, not frontline delivery services. The resulting impact of that has been that the number of staff in the regeneration area has reduced. There is still some activity in terms of regeneration happening within the council, but the amount of activity and the priority given to that is reduced in line with the budget that was set by full council in last February.
Thank you for that. Do you wish to come back, Councillor Churchman? Otherwise, Councillor
Yes. When I say I still feel it's a risk that as a council, we're supposed to be having a dashboard, pensions dashboard put in place, which the government have now put back. But that creates a lot of extra work for our pensions officer. And will the pensions department be able to cope? Planning, we know, is understaffed. We know planning is actually short of staff across the whole country, so that's nothing new. But as Ernst Young, the auditors, do you see this as a risk for this council? Thank you.
I would say that there is a general risk for staffing in councils across the country. I don't think Isle of Wight is any more or necessarily any less impacted by the challenges of recruiting appropriately trained and with an appropriate level of expertise staff. If I was to comment as the external auditor, I think the island has its own unique circumstances, which makes it that little bit more challenging. Just in terms of geography, but I don't think, if I talk to councils in London where I also have audits, they are really struggling for different reasons. So I think it is something that is absolutely crucial that you keep it on your risk register in the way that you have done, and to reflect on how you manage the delivery of services under those circumstances. So in terms of our assessment of the arrangements that you have in place, I think you have the right arrangements to manage, to identify and then manage those risks. But it's difficult for us to comment directly on such a statement, but it is a general challenge in the public sector.
Thank you. Certainly, I would note what is commented under strategic risk 3, which is around staff and capacity. So I think I would feel comfortable that this is properly captured at the moment. But obviously, CMT will keep that under review if there are any very specific things, and we may bring forward a particular strategic risk which might be time limited, as we indeed do have one. But Councillor Jarman is next.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm concerned with the moment with issues of mitigation of risk, and I had hoped to have by today the benefit of the figures regarding the debt for each school that may or may not transfer to the Isle of Wight Council in the future. But I wondered, and of course, having that figure now as a snapshot is very useful, because we can get that figure again in 3 months' time. And from that, we can see what the monthly increase of debt is that the current delay is causing. But I wonder what mitigation measures are being considered should the council need to take on that debt over the next year or perhaps 2 years.
Thank you. And Chairman, if I come in, and then Carrie Hebbleday may have some more detailed information as well. I think it's important to note that in terms of school deficits, schools that are in deficit should be putting in place a recovery plan of their own accord. That is a requirement of them. And Councillor Bacon has already referred to this morning being involved with a school who was in deficit, and a recovery plan was put in place. It will be an important part of the school place planning decision paper to understand the impacts of school closures being proposed as a result of that, should that be the route that Cabinet go down. So as part of the financial assessment of that decision paper, there will be an overall assessment of the financial impact of any deficit associated with those schools that are proposed for closing, if there are any, at that point in time, and that will be fully outlined and discussed within the cabinet paper when it comes forward. Kerry, do you want to add anything else to that?
I don't think there is anything to add at this stage. As you say, it is one of the considerations which will get drawn out in the cabinet report under the financial implications. It's obviously a clearly significant consideration. I don't have anything, any further detail to add at this point around that specific school that you mentioned.
You wish to follow up on that?
Yes, just if I could ask for an undertaking for those figures which were requested a month ago to be provided to the committee within the next 7 days. I think a month has gone by already. Another 7 days should see them secured. And if I can put in an advance request for them to be updated in 90 days' time as well, please.
I believe the figures are presented at Schools Forum. There is a report from July which has got the current position. I'm not off the top of my head sure on how frequently they are revised, but we can make you aware of that.
Thank you. Any further questions on this paper? Obviously a very important paper. I don't see any hands, so I'll put the recommendation, which is that we approve this risk register at this time. So I'll move that from the chair. Do we do so? We've obviously heard the comments from the Chief Executive around strategic risk 19 in particular. Are you content with that being approved? Yes, I see nods and hands. So yes. Item 10 is the standing item now, review of the Constitution. Report from me. 2 or 3 of us are members of the Future Governance Working Group. I think all of us. Councillor Quirk, are you on that as well? So all of those 4 present today are on that, and that work is getting underway. It did, as I suggested at the last Audit and Governance Committee, put Councillor Brodie as the mover of the motion in the lead on that, and he's certainly pushing that forward with a lot of information. We're doing it as much as we can without requiring any draw on officer time, because we're acutely aware of the impact on officers of the current situation as it is, and certainly, for example, Councillor Churchman and myself will be meeting later this week as a subgroup of that Future Governance Working Group. So I think at this stage, that particular element of the reviewing of the Constitution is, or it's not a review so much as a potential change to the Constitution, is working at pace. I don't think there is anything else I have to report at the moment. I don't think Councillor Potter is online. Oh, Councillor Potter, Mr. Potter, I've upgraded him. Is online to correct me otherwise. No, he's not. So, but if any other colleague feels there's something else that should have been reported, just shout now. In which case not. Item 11 is our work plan. You'll see that we have, I was looking at it again this morning, quite a bit for our December meeting, which is December the 11th. But I do still have in mind that we should find a way as a committee to become a little more proactive on some areas, particularly around the value for money side of things. Obviously, where we had reports around value for money from our external auditors, but I think there may be some work that we might usefully do in that area. Also, colleagues, although we weren't able to arrange a pre-meeting, one thing Councillor Ray Redrup was keen on is that we try to find a way of having a pre-meeting to audit and governance. So if other colleagues are keen on that, I will try and find a date early enough so it's in our diaries so that we can make that happen. Otherwise, unless anybody else has anything else on the work plan, I will move us to members' question time. Any member wishing to ask a question through me of the committee? Councillor Jarman, you wish to ask through me a question of the committee? Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Exactly so. I would like to follow up on a statement that was made by the leader, newly elected leader at the last meeting, which was that 40 or so executive decisions have been made in the last 12 months. I looked back in my emails and found out that 5 of those had been circulated that I could find to all members. And I wondered why it was that some executive decisions were circulated to all members and not all. And I think as a governance issue, and certainly as a matter of audit, this committee should have a reaction to that. And I would strongly recommend that we would promote that all executive decisions of the leader should be distributed immediately to all members. I don't know how you feel about that or others feel about that, but it would seem to be sensible that we can only scrutinise in this regard decisions that we know about. And if we don't know about them, then other issues may follow. So I think openness is the name of the game here.
Certainly, I noted that and was trying to work out to what exactly the number of decisions and which decisions were being referred to. It is within our corporate plan, of course, that things should be fair and transparent. So, Councillor Bacon, I'm sure if nothing else, you can transmit that back through to the new leader of the council.
Yes, of course, executive decisions include cabinet decisions, everything's public. So I think the number includes that. I'm not sure what Councillor Jarman is referring to, because other decisions are made public and are subject to call-in. So I'm not sure what is allegedly being hidden. I don't think there's anything. I'm sure that the Chief Executive may wish to add some technical points to that.
If you could, Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to suggest that actually I think the leader was referring to a number of decisions that included all of the cabinet decisions that had been made since the cabinet came into place when this administration first came into place. So obviously that will be a considerable number. The council's forward plan publishes both executive and non-executive delegated decisions where they are required to be published, and that's the route through which publication is made. It's slightly nuanced in that delegated decisions, well, no, actually all decisions that are put onto the forward plan and decisions that are due to be made are notified to members at the time of either publication of papers or announcements about delegated decisions and timescales for those decisions being determined and signed off.
Okay, thank you for that. But I think it's something we need to clarify with the new leader of the council as to what was meant by that statement, and if because it wasn't. I would agree with you, Councillor Jarman. It wasn't clear to me to what was being included in that commentary.
I did find on our website that there is a place on our website, on the ModGov website, where executive decisions are recorded. And I went through that list, which is on there, which is quite a long list. I didn't count how many there were, but it's quite a long list. And I did identify the 5 that I'd received an all members email about. The others on there, I did not receive an all members email about. And so I don't know on what basis some are decided for that route and others not. I would suggest that all executive decisions which end up being documented on our website should be sent out at the same time, if not at the earliest opportunity, to all members. I discovered quite a few on there I knew nothing about, which was somewhat disconcerting.
I think that has been well heard. Any other member with a question? Otherwise, I will close the meeting at 11:14 precisely. Having watched that clock. Thank you very much, and I will see a good number of you, but not everybody. If you do accidentally come on the 11th of December, Helen, we'll give you a mince pie. But thank you very much for your attendance.